Hey everyone, this is Thomas from Springfield Daily. We are in the studio in the Innovate Springfield Incubator in downtown Springfield. My guest today is Angel Sides, one of the Democratic candidates running in our local 13th Congressional District. Thank you so much for being here. So please, tell me a little bit about yourself and why are you running for Congress?
I'm a teacher and an activist, and pretty much everything I do, I try to inform the community. I'm the same reason I'm an activist is the same reason I've produced a commentary for the last 10 years, informing people about the importance of independent media. We have a media that's sponsored by corporations, and I find that to be a conflict of interest. For example, the media for the last 30 years has told people that we have more like for the last 25 years, we have a disputed science concerning global warming. This isn't disputed. James Hansen from the NASA Goddard Institute has stated that if we don't keep 85% of fossil fuels in the ground, it'll be game over for the planet. And he's been saying that for I know the last 20 years. So we should probably keep more than that in the ground at this point. But right now we have an acidic ocean. We have plankton that are dying at an alarming rate. We have sea turtles being hatched almost 100% female. We have the coral reefs dying, and scientists say we're undergoing the sixth mass extinction of all life right now. So I find that's why I'm mainly an environmental activist. I also have marched and protested for other causes like getting big money out of politics, for health care. That's another example of our media putting out propaganda where people now think we can't afford universal health care when every industrialized nation in Europe has some form of single payer universal health care. And, it doesn't make sense to America now because people are starting to realize that how can they afford that when we're the richest country in the world and we have a for-profit healthcare system that's so much more expensive and it gets even worse results than their healthcare system. Another example of this is just invading Iraq. The media was complicit with the military-industrial complex and taking us into an illegal war.
All right. So, I mean, you touched on a lot of good stuff there. And we're going to want to get to all of it. But what would you say is your number one issue in there of of all the things that you mentioned? What's your number one?
It's the environment because this global warming thing is scary. When I was a young girl, the ponds and rivers would freeze up thick and they would stay that way all winter. And I remember ice skating. I mean, for the last 20 years, you wouldn't be able to ice skate on any body of water here in central Illinois. And it's my number one issue mainly because it affects all life. I mean, it could end life if we're undergoing the sixth mass extinction, like scientists are saying, and that's not just people, but plants and animals now and forever. I mean, that's maybe I prioritize funny, but that's what I
No,
think.
you're not the first. You're not the first person to say that on this
Yeah.
show. So you've touched on you believe that it's real. You believe that it's a threat. So what should we do about it? What and since
Well,
you're
we
running
need to
for
move full throttle towards alternative energy. I don't eat very much meat myself. That's why I'm kind of pale and pasty, but um, uh, I'm going to start taking sublingual B12. But I think reducing meat, planting more trees. I see people cutting down trees all the time, all over, and our rainforests are shrinking. We need to replenish the rainforests in South America and plant more trees everywhere. And we really need to be moving full throttle towards alternative energy, and that is not just going to help global warming, but it's going to it's going to help pollution. So I think solar roads would kill a lot of birds with one stone because when you look at the infrastructure, we're putting money into roads and maintaining them and rebuilding them. Why not do the latest technology, which are these solar roads that are computerized, and they detect animals down the road. They can drain water off the road. They can, if they're on a parking lot, they can add a handicapped parking space when needed. They can turn into a basketball court after hours. They actually melt the snow off the road. So I think that could save money too down the road once they're implemented. And I have read that they supply any given city with 3 times the electricity that city needs, and we could maybe even convert our heating to electric and not need to use natural gas and have all this fracking all over that poisons the groundwater.
Right.
So.
Well, some of that sounds more like a local municipal issue.
Yeah.
So what role would the federal government play in some of those programs?
Well, yeah, the federal government could mandate that communities do this. They could subsidize it so that it's not so expensive to get the systems in place. And then maybe even with the money that's used for that, like with the taxpayer bailout of the banks, it could be paid back at some point to the taxpayer, because it will save money. It'll produce electricity and save on like plowing costs and things like that.
All right, and you talked about alternative energy and sort of a green portfolio. What technologies go into that, and what technologies maybe don't go into that? Thinking specifically of nuclear power.
So I don't consider nuclear power a green energy because I've seen a lot of news reports on independent media, which is what I've been doing my political commentary on, and not so much the corporate media, but the nuclear power plants leak radiation on a regular basis, and that is something a lot of people don't know, that they don't have to be damaged or there doesn't have to be a natural disaster. But, you can say, well, that's just a little, not like Fukushima, but quite frankly, there's been no small enough amount of this kind of radiation that doesn't produce cancer. So the plutonium and uranium is the most toxic kind of radiation. And then not on top of that, some nuclear power plants are getting old and probably producing more, than they should. And, everyone here in Illinois, we have a lot of nuclear power plants, and we know that they're not transporting and storing that uranium and waste like they should be. It's just sitting there in these power plants, and that doesn't make it a green energy. Once you do that, you try and transport it and store it. It's radioactive for 250,000 years or greater, and once all that is done, it has a very large carbon footprint. It's not a form of alternative energy in my mind. It shouldn't be in anyone's. I think we need to shut them down as they get older and not build any new ones. That's for sure.
All right. So you primarily you think solar is sort of the cure-all, or are there other technologies that you think need to fill some of the gaps?
Yeah, wind turbines, and we do subsidize wind turbines, and I think until all these systems are in place, they should be. And maybe, at some point, if we would end all these for-profit perpetual wars and we put money into what should be put into, we might even be able to help out other countries, with some kind of deal where they can pay us back with the energy produced, because India is looking to modernize and have electricity for all its citizens, and that's going to be a huge carbon footprint with India and some of these other countries. So.
All right. Well, you've mentioned the wars and the media's role, and you talk about on your fundraising page about independent media and sort of the lack thereof. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's dangerous for the reasons that I've already mentioned, that our media has put out propaganda, like influencing the public to think a certain way, to vote against their own best interest, and that's the importance of an independent media, where the viewers actually, through fund drives, pay for the media. And I just think that's so important because, I mean, I've campaigned for politicians, and having done that, I decided to start up doing a political commentary because I have seen the precinct list, and I don't think people would be voting that way if they really saw the other side of the story, which is what independent media shows people. So, yeah, it's kind of like, I just feel we're losing our humanity for a sect. We're the drone worker bee, and the media's our pheromone telling us what to do, how to do it, what to think, and most importantly, how to vote to enrich the 1% or the one queen bee. And that's kind of how I see it. Like, we've almost lost free will somehow because we're being lied to or influenced so greatly. But what people need to know about our media is they hire PR firms that have psychologists involved to test propaganda. And that wouldn't need to be done if they were just putting it out there like it should be, just telling the truth. But when I was growing up, people didn't give their comment. And I think that so highly influences the public. The news used to be just the facts, and they were required to tell the facts with a straight face, with no emotion. And that certainly isn't what is going on right now.
So do you think there could be, I guess, for-profit news that was objective, or do you think that's sort of a contradiction in terms?
Well, yeah, I think that is a contradiction in terms. I mean, everyone has to make a living. That's why really it should be subsidized in my mind, and maybe co-opted, and if at the very least bring back the fairness doctrine and some of these anti-consolidation laws that used to be on the books but are no longer.
All right. Well, in thinking in control of the media, and one of the major issues for us as a company was that the FCC recently voted to remove the net neutrality regulations.
Yes.
That was back in December, and I understand that's either just happened or is about to happen, start being implemented. What's your take on that? Was that the right move?
No. I mean, that is going to block information. You aren't going to know what you should be seeing when you don't know what should be there. And for example, people could send out information they think is important, but no one would see it. And it's going to ruin small businesses because there'll be a fast lane for those corporations that have more money. And I think it'll be a disaster. I think we just need one more senator to overturn the FEC ruling, and I think people need to call their congressman and try and get involved with this to get one more senator to overturn that decision, because that is vital that we have net neutrality. And for activists, we can maybe be stopped in ways that we can't spread information and organize like people are doing right now. So it could stifle dissent, ruin small businesses, and at the same time censor our media. And then they could charge more for, like Twitter. They could charge extra, Facebook, and you don't know what all is going to be an extra charge, and people can't afford that right now, with the economy the way it is. And so I don't think...
In that same vein of changes to the internet, during the Obama administration, at the same time the net neutrality rules were being implemented, we also gave up a large amount of control over the ICANN domain registry system to a nonprofit overseen by a more international body, instead of it being directly managed by the federal directly managed by the federal government. Was that the right move?
No, I mean we're getting more monopolized in that way instead of making it smaller, and we really need to keep things, as small as we can without all these monopolies that are going on and media conglomerates. So I think, I'm for. I mean, I would like to see these corporations just operate within the state they originated from, and then that would open up a lot of small mom and pop operations, including with our media. But that no one else is talking that talk, but we do need, to have more smaller businesses and kind of bust up the redistribute the wealth, in my opinion.
All right, and I guess switching tracks a little bit, you mentioned healthcare, the healthcare system, and the Republicans recently tried to push through a new healthcare bill to replace the existing Obamacare rules. What do you think about that? Do you think Obamacare goes far enough, or do you think it's not on the right track?
Well, I'm for expanded Medicare, like I said. The problem with Obamacare, and I'll just give an example. You want me to turn that off? Sorry, I forgot all about it.
It happens.
Yeah, I forgot all about it. I thought I did turn it down, actually. But the problem about Obamacare is, and I'll just give an example because it's a good example of what's wrong with it, and that is, I was watching Tom Hartman the other day, and someone called in and they said, I just had open heart surgery, and the bill was $150,000, and he had really good insurance. It cost $5,000 a year, and they when all was said and done, they said they were only going to pay $5,000 of his open heart surgery expenses. And he said, no, I had really good insurance. You should be covering most of it. Well, it turned out that they sent him a letter changing his health care, what it covered. And he swore he never got that letter. But if you think about it, how strange would that be? You would pay $5,000 a year just for $5,000 coverage. So I think that's the problem in a nutshell, that they can change what they're covering, and as expensive as it is, but everyone has to pay the same rate when they sign up, and it never goes down. So it's expensive. Yeah, it covers everyone, but expanding Medicare does too, and it's guaranteed coverage, and you know for sure what's going to be covered, and it covers vision, dental, rehabilitation, and in-home care for the elderly. So if that isn't worth 3% of your payroll tax, and that's what it is, and for most people, and it saves about 95% of Americans money, then I think people must not get sick very often, because just one of those would cover, would be worth that for most American families. It saves the average family of $4,000 a year when you consider the high costs of insurance premiums. Because really the insurance companies are the middleman. They're the middleman that the CEOs make over $165 million a year, and that's hard for me to wrap my head around whenever, there's some people who don't get preventative care and they wait too late, and then they have cancer and it can't be cured. So, why pay a middleman when it's so expensive anyway? You want our money just to go to the healthcare itself and eliminate the middleman.
All right, and
it does. It phases out the insurance companies over a period. So.
And while we're thinking about medication, does marijuana have legitimate medical uses, and should it be decriminalized, legalized, and for what uses?
Well, yeah, and even if you don't think marijuana is safe, it has been statistically shown that once you legalize a drug, the drug use itself goes down, and it has been proven to have medical benefits for glaucoma and for things such as withdrawal from heroin and pain. So, and go ahead and legalize it, test it, and see what all medicinal purposes can be used from marijuana. And plus, when people smoke marijuana right now, they don't know what's in it. I've heard of it being laced with arsenic and meth before, and so I think that's dangerous, and it really does need some regulation. It needs to be legalized.
All right, and just for medical uses or for recreational uses as well?
Like I said, for recreational, because it's a plant, and people should know what's in it if they choose to smoke it. And I don't recommend smoking anything because you're putting smoke in your lungs. But for medicinal purposes, it does have medicinal purposes. It's supposed to be really healthy to eat in a salad. It's a plant. We should be able to grow it, in my opinion. Yeah.
All right, and Congress recently passed a major tax overhaul. Was there anything in that bill that you liked, that you didn't like? I mean, obviously it was a major change to the way those taxes work, but...
Yeah, I mean, it lowered the corporate tax rate, and that is a permanent decrease, whereas the middle class their tax rate will be phased out over a period of years, and so the middle class won't keep their tax benefits, but the corporations will. So I think that's unfair. I think the worst thing about it is that it opens up drilling in the Arctic, and there's a provision in there that opens up drilling in the Arctic. So that goes back to global warming and the environment. And when you have a place that is pristine on this planet, it's too bad we're going in there drilling and making a mess of it. But I really think that it's just another way to make the rich richer, and it definitely doesn't redistribute the wealth, that's for sure.
All right, and switching over then in these last couple of minutes to the primary race that you're in. You're in a very crowded primary with some very qualified people. Why are you the standout candidate?
Well, when people vote, they really should look for somebody who has been saying the same thing for many years. That is, they're not just pandering to the vote. And the other thing that people should look for, and what I look for in a candidate, is how do they finance their campaign. I've had small contributions, and I've been financing my own campaign. And those are the two things I look for, and the same reason I campaigned for Bernie Sanders, because, he has been saying the same thing for many years. Plus, he was an independent senator from Vermont, and I like that. So I think those are the two things that people need to look for when they vote. I've been an environmental activist, so I'm not just pandering to the vote in that way. And everything I've done has been out of my own pocket and time. As an activist, campaigning for certain politicians, I paid for my own travel and expenses. And when I went to Iowa campaigning every weekend for Bernie Sanders, I was really upset that the media wasn't actually airing his speeches, so that like you would see him gesture and then some commentator saying bad things about him instead of actually being able to hear what he was saying. So I recorded one of his speeches off of independent media, and I was distributing it all over when I went door to door in Iowa. And I was there every weekend when it was 20 below, no matter what the weather. And so I wasn't that surprised when he did well in Iowa, but with my activism, it's to put out a message. With my commentary, it's to put out a message. And, the next step would be this, and I'm still trying to put out the same message. So, and I do it on my own time and out of my own pocket. So.
All right. And a lot of people, primaries have typically very low turnout, even by American election standards. What would you say to an independent voter or to a moderate voter who maybe thinks that the Democratic primary is not for them? Why should they pull a Democratic ballot?
Yeah. For one thing, when I look at a precinct list, the Republican Party voters vote and Democratic Party voters do not. And so we need an open primary in the state, for one. But the Republican Party has to start waking up. For one, if you're independent, watch independent media. But they have to start waking up to the Republican Party is the corporate party. They all vote on behalf of corporations that don't serve our interests, not in the form of health care, not in the form of the environment, and certainly not when we're going into all these wars. So why are you voting Republican? Some people are starting to wake up, and I see on the precinct list some Republicans switching to Democrat. And I'm asking more and more, I'm asking for the Republicans to pull a Democratic ballot, start watching independent media and really know what's going on before you, and the Democrats just have to get out there and vote. And I think the independent people right now have to realize by not voting, by voting independent, maybe come this general election, considering the conditions we have right now with our elections, they should be asking themselves, am I spoiling the vote? Am I splitting the vote? And they really need to consider pulling a Democratic ballot as well.
All right, you mentioned in there an open primary. How is that different from what we have now?
Right. An open primary election, you do not have to declare your party, because a lot of people don't like to do that, especially Democrats. Apparently, they don't get out and vote. So I've campaigned locally for politicians that are pushing an open primary election, and it really is the biggest suppression of the vote there is from just looking at the precinct list. It's very obvious. So I think that should be brought up more, and where people don't need to declare their party. And talking to people, they want that, but it never comes to be. Illinois is kind of corrupted in that way.
Well, I guess why would declaring your party have a suppressing effect on the vote?
Because people, and I've heard people say this, they've got a state job, especially here in Springfield, and they feel like they would be in trouble or might lose their job if they voted in the primary. They really are afraid for their jobs, and that is understandable. Everybody needs, to support their family.
No, for sure. And you seem like you've got a pretty good breadth of knowledge. You mentioned you watch independent media. Do you affiliate with Bernie Sanders is a socialist, as far as Democratic socialist, as far as I understand. Do you affiliate with that label, or are you a progressive, or?
Well, like I said, I think capitalism is a good thing if we could redistribute the wealth and rein in these corporations to operate within their states and that they originated from. And I really don't know that Bernie Sanders is just a full-fledged socialist, and maybe he shouldn't have called himself that, but he called himself a democratic socialist. And I think he kind of explains it the same way I do, that some things do need to be socialized, and we already have socialism. We have Social Security, we have the libraries, we have schools that are socialized, we have the fire departments and the post office. So but if you think about it, any of those things aren't a matter of life and death, but our health care is. So why isn't our health care socialized? Of course it needs to be socialized. Not everything. I would be for small businesses. That's, I think, is when everybody fell in love with capitalism. We need to go back to that.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here. My guest today was Angel Sides, running in the Democratic primary for the 13th District. When's that primary date?
March 20th. Pull a Democratic ballot.
All right. Again, thank you so much for being here. This has been Thomas Clatterbuck for Springfield Daily Radio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.